Hello, I'm Finn Ross. This is Adam Young. We are FRAY Studio. We specialize in creating content for live stage environments such as West End, Broadway, opera, pop, rock, anything you sort of name it. Our general approach is one of sort of storytelling and narrative within our work. And we sort of use the tagline, we see sort of stages, not screens. So we sort of don't really think of content in a 16:9 format. We think of it more in a three-dimensional format. And today we're here to talk to you about probably the largest application we've done of Notch so far, along with the Disguise Media Server for the Disney's Frozen on Broadway, which opened last year now and is still running. So why we went towards Notch for an element of the Frozen's design was there is a 12 by 9 meter LED wall that sits upstage for the entire evening, so it needs to do something interesting for 2.5 hours. And it's nice if that continues to change and evolve and be sort of beautiful. And the Aurora is a big part of the story process. It's connected to the kind of feelings of one of the characters, Elsa. If any of you have children, you will know all about this film. If you have missed it, you're lucky. I literally can sing you every single song now, and not because I want to. But anyway, the Aurora is part of Elsa's emotion, so it needed to be able to respond to anything she did in a kind of natural and fluid way. So we needed to kind of create a beautiful, flowing, endless piece of animation that would last all night long. From previous experiences of putting Aurora Borealis-like effects into shows, we knew this was incredibly render-intensive, took a really long time, and was very hard to kind of make actually quick and in response to performers. So we felt we had to go down a generative route. We'd kind of dabbled around with Notch for doing weird things with cameras on Bat Out of Hell, the musical, and played with it on something else, but I can't remember right now. So we thought we'd give it a go. So the kind of brief that we had was, it has to be playing infinitely as the audience walks in. It's the preset. It kind of can't ever repeat because I hate loops. I kind of feel like that's lazy and cheating. Like if you know how long your show is, then you can make a piece of content for every second of it. It had to react in real time to performers' actions in a non-time-coded sequence. So when she moved an arm, spoke a word, looked in a different direction or whatever. So it couldn't really be pre-made content. It had to be something natural. But it also has to be able to work with timecode. So when we're in big musical theatre numbers that are governed by timecode and someone decides we actually need to add a 16-bar dance break, we wanted to be able to accommodate that quickly and easily without having to re-render an entire piece of content and wait till tomorrow or the afternoon to see the effect of what we'd made, and then when we saw it was wrong, be able to change it. Had to be reliable. It's got to work 8 shows a week, 52 weeks a year. By the end of next year, there'll be 5 productions of the show, so it has to be a sort of stable and robust thing. And like really crucially for this entire show was none of it could feel digital. It has to feel organic. A large amount of the scenery was stuff we did in collaboration with Walt Disney Animation Studio in LA, which was that kind of very classic Disney hand-painted kind of, not quite cell animation look, but more like concept art that sort of was about bringing the kind of the LED scenery into the real world of the scenery. So at times you couldn't really tell the difference. So we had to take this very technical thing and make it not feel technical. So it was an interesting challenge.
So with that brief, there were some major challenges and considerations to take in. One of them being the massive resolution that we were trying to process everything at. And with it being a Disney show and with the front row of the audience being so close to everything, it was important that we were actually processing at the real resolutions and not upscaling something smaller. And with such large production, there was a very large team. There were a lot of editor laptops everywhere. So proxies for Notch had to be a consideration so that every machine in the system could process and could see what we were trying to achieve. One of the other big things was the union on Broadway, and at what point a programmer and an animator's jobs cross over. So it's one thing to make a block with a lot of exposed parameters. In an ideal world, you would want someone with an artistic eye to then keyframe that block, but according to union rules, that would not be allowed. So it's how you control what you're exposing to give certain boundaries to a programmer. At the time, it still felt relatively new that we were using Notch in such a way. The show was being done on GX1 servers, two servers, which were still relatively
Brand new at that time.
And there was some technical negotiations. And it also had to work across a very large system that had 9 servers and
I don't know how many, but 16 projectors, maybe.
yeah, and a lot of editors and a lot of different people who could get into the system and tweak things at any point.
So with all of that in mind, just sort of dive quickly into the world of, so in theatre, we can't really rely on timecode because things go wrong. Someone kind of misses a line, we jump forward, your animation will kind of mess up. Then you're kind of, fucked and doesn't look nice. Then, a problem with the scene change can happen, and then there's adds time. So then if you're trying to reach a point in animation, you can't get there. So, this kind of happens on every single show. Things go wrong, and it sort of goes endlessly. So the big stretch of the show where there are no time code to govern it. So this is sort of why we had to go to a kind of notchy world to get this kind of fluidity. Because if you're sitting in a vamp, you need to be able to come out of a vamp neatly. So to sort of illustrate, this is a sort of sample of the Aurora playing along. It kind of keeps going smoothly. We skip a line. Q2 is going to happen much sooner, but then because it's all generative and it's all real, it just happens whenever we want it to happen. Which made everything kind of fluid and beautiful in a way that I just don't think we could have ever achieved with conventional animation. And also it allowed us to kind of build every single look naturally and organically live on stage without having to rely on heavy pre-visualization, which has its use, but it's by no means perfect. Adam.
So this block had many false starts. And that was trying to largely get the aesthetic right, to look not digital and to give it that Disney quality to it. And we tried building it with particles and various other ways, but in the end, we ended up going back to something very simple and just using fractal patterns. So it all starts off as a cell pattern. A camera gets added to it, which gives the whole thing the sense of perspective disappearing off. It's colored, turbulence is added to it, curl noise is added to it, and then it's duplicated and given slight variations in color and seeds. The whole thing then gets directional frame feedback, which just drags everything. It then all gets layered up in blurred together slightly, and then you add the extra elements that make up the sky, the fractal, the stars. And what we ended up with was a not too complicated system that could effectively produce everything that we needed it to produce and also stay within the processing limitations that we had been set. And in the end, we ended up with 35 exposed attributes. And these were all limited in their minimums and maximums. Some went through different modifiers to control the numbers back to something a programmer would understand. And generally, the block existed as a living thing. So when something would come up in the technical rehearsals or some other feature was requested, then we would go back into it, add the extra things, and then expose more parameters that could control it all.
Yeah, I think it definitely grew over time. It probably started with about half those number of parameters, and as we sat there fiddling with it, it evolved and evolved and evolved with sort of like, hey, Adam, how about this? And hey, how about that? And I mean, the answer never came back as no, which was kind of fantastic because it felt like we had a tool we could make anything with. So now we had this sort of fabulous toy to play with. It was quite a learning curve working out how to actually use something, because this is just a sort of screenshot from the disguised timeline of something which is basically just trying to change some colors and make it wobble a little bit, which brought up this sort of fascinating problem that we hadn't really encountered until we got there, which was we as designers or digital artists or animators are not able to, when working in America, in the theatre space, according to the rules of the union, we can't touch the software interface. We cannot create cues. We can only feed into it, which is the most incredibly boring. But yeah, that was a challenge. But on the upside, we had the wonderful thing that we never had to run a crossfade, because I hate crossfades. But the problem, because they're what we have to rely to a lot of the time in theatre, because we're not on timecode, we can't animate our way in and out of things. But this allowed us to have no crossfades in any kind of Aurora-based action, which was kind of like a personal revelation for me. We didn't need to use endless layers to kind of build up one look. The notch block could kind of more or less take care of all of it. We could put background scenery and change the sky texture, change the star texture, because most of the show happens at night. We didn't really need to do much daytime, which was sort of just wonderful. We didn't need to endlessly revise animation whenever anything changed, because, I mean, this show wasn't too bad for adding and fiddling around with music, because certainly a lot of the stuff from the film was fairly set and unlikely to change, but new numbers certainly altered. And on other shows, like Adam and I did Mean Girls, the musical, which is much better than it sounds, I promise you. It's kind of amazing. But that was a show on which we were using quite a lot of timecode, and stuff was added and subtracted every single day, and it became a mathematical nightmare keeping up with both it and animation and queuing. It was horrible. We don't need to kind of secretly go from one layer to another. It made programming a lot simpler because it was just one layer of keyframes. We didn't lose any kind of cues because the music department changed something and don't tell you, because I think with timecode there's also a big problem in understanding how other departments use it from the music department's perspective. So they feel like they can just throw a bar in here and there, but then that actually throws out a massive change, and suddenly lighting and video are either way ahead or way behind. So it sort of saved a lot of that, because we just use the stage manager as our kind of human timecode thing, because she can call on the count. So when you add a subtract time like that, just have the human do it. Don't leave it to the machine. And then we didn't waste time in tech reclocking to timecode, because as much as we spent about 9 months making this show, the way time is divvied up is incredibly precious. So it kind of allowed us to be very quick and very responsive to anything that was happening, which was just kind of wonderful. And it saved us hundreds of hours of rendering, just so much rendering, which was beautiful. And this is sort of an example of the notch block in relation to other design elements, where I think we managed to get this sort of nice blend of something slightly painty, slightly kind of magical, like a living painting, which was beautiful. And the fun sort of didn't end with the Aurora, because when we realized we could do other things with Notch, it naturally kind of spread out. So we used it to generate the sense of kind of light moving within ice, because all the sort of scenery that looks like stone magically transforms into ice because it's got an LED kind of wall in behind it that then kind of when it activates, it kind of glows glassy and transparent. But, to make it feel like ice, it needed a sense of light moving through it. So this allowed us to basically feed a more or less static texture of ice into a notch block, which would then kind of give you the sense of light reflecting and moving around in it, which was, again, I think another spectacular use of fractal noise. Yes. Like we do is. And I think my mic stopped working, so I'll just talk louder. So that, and ice is in nearly every single scene of the show, so it did save a phenomenal amount of time rendering these things, which was just sort of beautiful.
And with this show, particularly, pre-visualization could really only take us so far. When you have LED walls built into the set, and the set is made of a semi-transparent material, and then you're projecting on the front of that all at the same time. There's only so much a visualizer can portray what you will actually get back. Because using Notch, we were able to very, very quickly adjust everything that you could see on stage to look exactly how you wanted it to look. If we were doing it in a more traditional way, then you would end up bumping out a ton of different renders or stills and sending them to the stage to see which color blue matches their costumes properly.
And I think it also allowed us to work a little bit more like how a lighting designer can in sort of fluidly developing a look on stage, because a moving light is very malleable in comparison to a piece of video content. And Natasha Katz, the lighting designer, and ourselves had a brilliant collaboration because we could just sit there and futz around endlessly with whatever we fancied. And then, of course, being Frozen and Notch having a lovely particle system, we had to make snow as well. But what was lovely is we could have it snow for 12 minutes and never have a repetition, and then also make the snow kind of do weird things whenever someone fell off a bridge or a reindeer did something funny or whatever. So the whole world could kind of remain alive and alert to performers' behavior, which was beautiful.
And then our final use for Notch on Frozen was a very technical one, where we ended up working with the programmers and the system engineers to build a projector status window. So by linking it back up in D3, the operator could have this on a screen in the control room, and all the different boxes could light up different colors. They all meant different things, and it meant that one person could sit and look at that screen and be informed of everything that's going on with all the projectors in the system.
And it should be snowing in that thing, which is the final part of the charm that we all think is hilarious. But for some reason, the PowerPoint's not playing snow. And that brings us to the end of Frozen and Generative. Thank you. Do we have time for any questions? Do we do that, or yeah? Are there any?
First of all, beautiful work. Was there, working with such a big crew and so many technical things, what was the main challenge to synchronize everything? Was there a technical director?
We had a sort of tech team of 3. So there was a system engineer who largely lived in the basement, kind of routing, network signal, everything everywhere. And then we had a programmer who kind of basically lived in the disguised timeline world. And then a sort of technical, I have a associate, Jonathan Lyle, who basically kind of oversaw everything from a sort of meta view of just, the layout of the system, how it was supposed to behave in the broader brushstrokes. And then Asher, who's the system engineer, kind of nailed it all together tightly. And when it came to timeline, Zach was really the only person who would do anything in the timeline that would affect Q. So it was a very carefully managed system, and there was a lot of integration and conversation with both Notch and Disguise as we were kind of approaching putting the system together and sort of, just tweaking bits of software so they worked in a nice harmonious way. And then we had two Disguise devs sitting behind us for a couple of weeks, both in Denver and in New York, to iron everything out, and Notch at the end of a Slack channel, very helpful all the time. Anyone else? Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Give them both a big hand.